Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of August of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians, probably a fourth or fifth day in a row, show significant progress on the ground. And as you can see, according to this map, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians once again managed to improve their position significantly. So, to understand how exactly the Russians were moving during the previous days, I believe that it's better to start everything from the beginning, more precisely from the 8th or 7th of August of 2025. This is exactly the moment when the Russians launched their offensive operation. So, this is it. This is the situation in the Pokrovsk direction by the end of the 8th of August of 2025. As you can see, most of the territories that were taken by the Russians during the next 4 days were under complete Ukraine control. The 8th of August is the date when we start receiving first unconfirmed reports about work of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, especially in the area of the settlements of Zoto Kodes, the settlement of Kucherev Yar, Dobropillia, Bilinskaya, Rodinskaya, Svetla, Shiftanka. So this is just the beginning. By the end of the 9th of August of 2025, the Russians began their offensive, and during the first day of their offensive operation, we got just a short report about additional progress on the ground in the northern direction. So nothing special, the regular picture that we used to see almost every single day before the beginning of this offensive. But on the 10th of August, we received first report that shown us significant progress on the ground. As you can see, by the end of the 10th of August of 2025, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of the settlement by the name of Rodinskaya. More precisely, the Russians cut the settlement of Rodinskaya and the northern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration from the mainland. At the same time, the armed force of the Russian Federation began advancing along the railways in the area of the settlement of Dorozhny. A lot of very heavy clashes were recorded in this area. And of course, the most important is that the Russians began their offensive operation in the northern direction, which was the most unexpected, both for pro-Russian resources and of course for pro-Ukrainian resources and of course for Ukrainian authorities. So this is the situation by the end of the 10th of August. And you know that when talking about the previous stage of the special military operation, let's say starting from 2023, the Russians were improving their positions very slowly. The changes on the ground from months to months varies from, let's say, 400 square kilometers per month to 600 square kilometers per month, nothing more. But when talking about August of 2025, just during the previous 4 days, the Russians took under control more than 140 square kilometers in this direction. So huge progress on the ground was recorded just for 4 days of Russian offensive operation. So now let's move further and let's discuss the situation by the end of the 11th of August of 2025. And as you can see, by the end of the 11th of August, the Russians managed to improve their positions as twice in comparison with the beginning of the 8th of August. So the Russians were improving the rate of offensive more and more. They were moving faster and faster. They were sending more and more troops further in the northern direction, in the western direction, and of course in the northeastern direction. Pro-Ukrainian resources reported that in this direction the Russians involved 101,000 soldiers, significant number obviously. So by the end of the 11th of August of 2025, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the settlement of Rodinskaya. They stabilized the situation, and from this moment the Ukrainians lost any possibilities to carry out successful counter-offensive operation with the purpose to probably restore connection with the settlement of Rodinskaya with the mainland. At the same time, the Russians improved their positions in the fields between roads of attacks in the area of the settlements of Novoshakhova, Dorozhny, and so on. Furthermore, the village of Dorozhny was taken by the Russians completely. But the most important updates as for the end of the 11th of August of 2025, we got from the most northern direction, because by this date, by that time, the Russians published first reports that they managed to get for as close as possible to the settlement of Zoto Kodes and to answer the village from the south. Furthermore, several resources reported that by the end of the 11th of August, the Russians managed even to dig in deeper. And we can see another road of offensive, this time in the eastern direction, with the purpose to outflank the settlements of Shakhova, Volodymyrovka, Sofiivka, and Toretska. So this is the situation by the end of the 11th of August. So now we are coming to the 12th of August, to the current date, when the Russians probably published and, let's say, shown us the most significant progress on the ground since the beginning of this breaking through operation. Now let's discuss this in details. So as you can see, during the previous 12 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their progress on the ground 2 times more in comparison with the 11th of August. So as you can see, every single day the Russians take under control 2 more territories in comparison with the previous day, and this is very, very dangerous situation for the armed forces of Ukraine. So let's discuss this situation in details, and for these purposes I believe it's time to add additional events on the map, so we will be able to compare progress on the ground with everything that was published. And first, let's talk about the northeastern part of the settlement of Mirnograd and the city and the Pokrovsk agglomeration. According to different mappers, the Russians secured the northeastern part of Mirnograd, took under control the mine of Komsomolskaya, and which is the most important, the Russians entered the settlement of Mirnograd from the northeast, and this is a very critical situation for the armed forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, we got first report that the Russians moved through the settlement of Krasny Liman and took under control several buildings and several streets in the eastern part of the city of Rodinska. And this area is very important. I would like to point to attention that since the beginning of the Russian breakthrough operation, we haven't received almost anything that can confirm this progress on the ground. So we are talking, some sources are saying that this is the progress of sabotage and reconnaissance groups, some sources are saying about regular army of the armed force of the Russian Federation, but it doesn't matter because we still haven't received anything. And you know that before the NATO, before the Trump-Putin summits, I'm not saying that, but there are small chances that all these things might be just something like a media attack, right? But could be a media attack. But today we got first geolocation that confirms Russian progress on the ground, and this video was published by the Ukrainian sources. And here we can see how the Ukrainian artillerymen were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the eastern part of the settlement of Rodinska. This is the episode. The author of this video claims that exactly in this moment we can see how Ukrainians attacked Russian positions, and another position was attacked a bit further in the northeastern direction, the settlement of Sukhetskaya. So as for the end of the 12th of August of 2025, we have at least 2 geolocations that confirm additional progress on the ground, and that confirm, first of all, Russian complete control over the settlement of Sukhetskaya, most likely, and the villages and territories to the east. And the most important, this video confirms Russian control over the eastern part of the settlement of Rodinska, which means that most likely during the previous 24 hours the Russians established complete control over the mine of Krasnolimanskaya. The Russians moved further in the western direction and took also under control the mine of Rodinskaya. So maybe the Russians haven't established control over these strategical mines. Maybe the Ukrainians were caught in cauldron on the territory of these mines without any chances for evacuation. But the difference is just the Ukrainians most likely will show some resistance for 1 or 2 days, and anyway sooner or later they would be forced to surrender. Another important thing is that according to the same author, according to pro-Russian resource, the armed forces of the Russian Federation moved even further in the western direction, and first sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation were recorded on the outskirts of the village by the name of Nova Alexandriivka, so exactly in this point. So this is very important progress on the ground, because if we compare the distances, if we calculate the distance between possible position of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the southern direction and Russian positions in the area of Nova Alexandriivka, we see that the current distance could be less than 10 kilometers, which means that it's like 5 kilometers from the south and 5 kilometers from the north, which means that the Russians established complete FPV drone control over this territory without any chances for any type of equipment or any type of unit of the armed forces of Ukraine for successful evacuation. And starting of the 12th of August of 2025, we can make a conclusion based just on this report that for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, the armed force of the Russian Federation managed to encircle the armed force of Ukraine on the territory of the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. We're not talking about cauldron, we're talking just about operational encirclement, but anyway, it doesn't mean that the situation is better for the Ukrainians. The situation is critical without any chances for recovering. And another important thing that at the same time the Russians entered the settlement by the name of Shiftanka. This is another village it's already the northwestern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So we finished with the northwestern and the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, and I would like to tell you just a few words about the situation in the southwestern part of this area. And now let's talk about the settlement of Udachne. As we can see, we have changes on the ground. So this is, for example, the situation by the end of the 11th of August of 2025. According to reports we got during the previous days, weeks, the Russians managed to probably answer the settlement of Udachne and to take under control positions around the settlement itself. And today we had this geolocation. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainian FPV drone operator was attacking a building with the blue roof on the territory of the settlement. Based on this video, we came to the conclusion that Ukrainian, and also according to the author of this video, the Ukrainian FPV drone operator was attacking position of the armed force of the Russian Federation. Based on this video, we came to the conclusion that most likely the most southern part of the settlement is already under complete Russian control. So as we can see, the Russians, with significant progress of the Russians to the northeast of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, we see that the Russians began their offensive operation from the southwestern direction with the purpose to get as close as possible to the M30 road. So we see now the Russians began the tightening the news operation around the city and the Pokrovsk agglomeration with the purpose to cut the Ukrainians completely in cauldron. And when talking about this cauldron, I'm not sure the exact number of Ukrainians that might be caught by the Russians, but obviously we're not talking about hundreds, we're not talking about even thousands. Most likely we're talking about tens of thousands of the armed forces of Ukraine who are currently located in this area. I believe that currently there are from 10 to 15,000 soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of this agglomeration, and we see that the chances for their evacuation are minimal. So we finished with the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Now let's move to the Dobropillia direction. Here we have additional batch of updates. The sources reported that the Russians secured the villages of Ivanovka, Novoshakhova, Volne, and the most important, the Russians secured the village of Rubizhne. The Russians answered the village of Novodonbass from the east, and currently there are very heavy clashes. And this is a final village on the way along the railways in the direction of the settlement of Dobropillia. When talking about the city of Dobropillia, this night we got very interesting article published by let's say the local Telegram channel. You know that Ukraine has local Telegram channels every single town or city where the Ukrainians have possibilities to publish latest updates, probably to publish their own ads or something like this. And according to information we have today, the local sources began publishing this post. And according to this post, a group of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance forces were discovered in the area of the bus station of the city of Dobropillia. So here we can see with very poor quality Russian a hand with two fingers, and the title, the bus station. So this building was recognized. This is exactly the bus station. And when talking about geolocation, this is exactly the bus station, the territory of the city. So according to locals who are currently living on the territory of the settlement of Dobropillia, first sabotage and reconnaissance groups of the armed force of the Russian Federation entered the central part of the city. As for now, we haven't adjusted the map because this might be a real fake or speculation or attempt from the Russian side to ruin the Ukrainian, let's say, not logistic, but their spirit to show resistance completely. Because if this information is being confirmed, obviously Ukrainians have nothing to do inside of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, and the upcoming night is the best, probably suitable time for evacuation. And now let's move further. In the most northern part, there are very heavy clashes. Today, the sources reported that the Russians secured the settlement by the name of Zoto Kodes. Ukrainians haven't managed to show any resistance in this area. According to information from the locals, the village is completely taken by the Russian armed forces. Furthermore, we have report that the Russians managed to improve their positions further in the northwestern direction and to cut TO 514 road. The main logistic arteria used to be a main logistic arteria between the Pokrovsk agglomeration itself and the Kramatorsk-Konstantinovka agglomeration. Another important thing is that Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation, at least somehow, and for these purposes, according to information we have, the Ukrainians introduced the first military army corps of the armed forces of Ukraine by the name of Azov. So obviously this is very interesting piece of news. To stabilize the front near Pokrovsk, they threw in Azovis from the first corps of the National Guard. Such formations are usually saved for demonstration raids or beautiful photos and are not thrown to the front line of the armed forces of the Russian Federation with fight. So if you ask my opinion, and I know that we have a lot of talks, lots of rumors about the situation. Once again, very interesting article and very important statement. Such formations are usually saved for demonstration raids or beautiful photos. So this first corps will not serve as the unit or as a tool to stabilize the situation in this area. So now when talking about the operation, Russians, according to different sources, currently operates in this direction, and as we understand, the Russians are moving further and further, and this is obviously a breakthrough without any chances for evacuation, maybe even to restore control over the entire eastern and the southeastern part of Ukraine. So that is why the Ukrainians came to the conclusion that the only thing they can do is to bring Azov forces. Once again, the Ukrainians are not going to use them for beautiful counter-offensive operation or beautiful counter-attacks or some special operations with the purpose to break through Russian offensive, to break Russian plans, to cut this pocket, to encircle millions of Russians or something like this. No, this is not the thing that this Azov unit is going to do. Basically, as I understand, maybe I'm wrong, so that is why I'll just give you my opinion. I believe that Ukrainians and Zelensky and Syrsky are going to use this Azov 12 Special Purpose Brigade of Azov with one purpose. They are planning to use them as anti-retreat forces. You know that during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates that Ukrainians left their positions. A lot of Ukrainian units and formation left their positions without showing any resistance. And the sources are saying that mainly we're talking about forces from the Territorial Defense Brigade, from Just Police detachments, and so on. So those units and those forces who were not trained for real combat with real Russian army. So that is why Ukrainians don't show any resistance, and they leave every single territory as soon as they see another group of Russian forces. Sometimes the Ukrainians have 10 soldiers in the place, and the Russians have just 3 sabotage and reconnaissance group soldiers, and Ukrainians prefer to fall back without any clashes. So that is why the Ukrainians are going to deploy these Azov forces as anti-retreat units with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. They need to stabilize the situation in this direction, no matter the price they're going to pay for this. So the task, the Azov forces are tasked very simple. Nobody alive can leave this pocket, and that's it. And this is the end. This is the end of the statement. Nobody can leave this pocket. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians. It doesn't matter for them. For them, what matters is the stabilization of the front line and not to allow the Russians to break through further in the northern and the northwestern direction. But the problem is that the Azov units are being redeployed not, let's say, from the city of Kiev or from the Evacuation, from the city of fully loaded fresh blood or something like this. The Ukrainians are planning to redeploy their Azov units from the Kliban-Bysk and Konstantinovsky direction. According to information we have, their former position was in the area of the villages of Kliban-Byk, Katerinovka, and Sherbinovka, where the Russians are attacking these days Ukraine positions significantly. And according to information we have, the Ukrainians in this direction were completely caught in cordon with heavy losses. And we discussed a lot of videos in the previous days how Ukrainians were trying trying to cross the lake of Gliban-Byk, how the Ukrainians were trying to move through forest under very heavy fire of Russian drones and artillery and mortars. So we believe that if the Ukrainians Azov forces have anybody to bring here, obviously they would be too exhausted to stabilize the situation. But most likely with this redeployment is connected this huge number of icons in this area. When talking about the southern part of Konstantinovka, as you can see during the previous 24 hours, lots of events were recorded in the area of Pleshevka, Nelipovka, Ivanopolia. So when talking about this area, this is exactly the evacuation line. So most likely these days the Ukrainians received this order to retreat and to fall back from this area towards the city of Konstantinovka and to try to stabilize the situation exactly there. And that is why we start receiving lots of updates of how Ukrainians began using equipment and vehicles with the purpose to leave these territories as fast as possible. But the Russians most likely expected the situation when the Ukrainians began evacuation. Basically the Russians destroyed probably almost everything they managed to discover on these main lines. So this is the situation. Ukrainians the Azoviets haven't been redeployed to this direction, but they have already suffered huge losses during the redeployment process. And of course we believe that maybe this night the Russians will use a huge number of missiles probably to attack Ukrainians, especially trains, railways. Ukrainians obviously are not going to wait for miracle. They will try to bring as many as possible forces, not just Azov forces, and the only way how to do this fast is railways. So that is why we're going to see lots of attacks most likely. And the Russians continue their offensive operation in the eastern direction. The Russians have just one problem in this breakthrough, according to my understanding, and we are talking about the villages of Vladimirovka, the village of Shakhova, because these villages are too close to Russian positions. And telling the truth, Ukrainians can easily regroup, if they can regroup, and counterattack from this direction and to make lots of troubles and problems for the Russians. So we see that the Russians are breaking through in the northwestern direction, but this pocket is too dangerous. It's too unpleasant pocket for the Russians. We believe that they will try to cut this pocket until the Ukrainians redeploy Azov units in this direction. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. The situation is critical. This disaster, it's a disaster for Ukraine. Zelensky during the day is trying to probably convey people to tell them that everything is okay, that nobody will accept anything probably accepted by Russia and the United States of America. At least this information was stated by Yermak. So Zelensky had calls with different leaders. He talks with Modi, he talked with French president, with Merz, with Macron. He had lots of talks and conversations, but we understand that this will lead to nothing, because Russia has full initiative in their hands and their continued offensive. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.